If you're applying to law school this coming fall, this cycle is going to feel different. And the reason is simple. There are several structural factors all playing out at the same time. Over the past few years, we've seen big swings in application volume. Applications surged, early numbers spiked, and so admissions offices had no choice but to slow down. When law schools see volatility, they hesitate. They don't make rushed decisions, they hold files longer, and they stretch out decisions. And those patterns don't just disappear overnight. Now look ahead to the cycle beginning this fall, and you have people reapplying from previous competitive years. People who might have delayed their decisions for financial reasons. People who were retaking the LSAT to improve their scholarship leverage. And of course, many applicants see law school as stability in a shifting economy. That means early application spikes this fall are very possible once again. And when law schools see early spikes, they pump the brakes. They waitlist more applicants, they extend the timeline longer. Now you layer in the financing shift coming this July, the elimination of the Grad Plus loans, that is going to directly affect you. For those who are not aware, the Grad Plus loans are disappearing in July of this year in just about 3 to 4 months. So anybody applying to law school this fall to start law school in fall 2027 will be fully inside the new lending system. For decades, law school financing followed a predictable model. The Stafford loans covered about $20,000 per year, and Grad Plus loans covered the rest. No cosigner needed, income-driven repayment safety net included. But that model is gone. So funding $70,000 to $100,000 per year now looks very different. Your options become private loans with higher interest rates and stricter approval, with less flexibility, or maybe family support, which of course many students simply do not have, or you've got your scholarships. And scholarships, merit aid is driven primarily by your LSAT score. It's not your resume, it's not your personal statement, doesn't really matter how compelling your story is, it's just your score. Now combine that with applicant volume. Over the past few years, applications surged significantly, but of course, seats did not increase accordingly, law schools didn't double their faculties, and scholarship budgets definitely didn't double. So now you've got more people competing for the same number of seats in a world where borrowing is riskier. And at the same time, there are more people taking the LSAT, more people getting high scores, including 170 plus scores, and that pushes medians upward. A score that once fell comfortably above the median may now barely meet the median. If you add in the continued rise in extended time accommodations, which are legitimate and necessary for many students, but more time, of course, will generally reduce careless mistakes. All of that combines to mean you have more high scores entering the pool, and the percentiles compress as a result. Remember that there is no asterisk next to a score report indicating that a particular test taker got extra time. And so if you're applying to law school this fall and you're aiming for last year's median, that may not give you leverage. You've got to have a margin. Now let's talk strategy for your cycle. If you're applying to start law school in fall 2027, you want to test earlier in the cycle if possible. I'm talking about June, August, or September, because if you can apply the second that applications open in September, that's when law schools have the most scholarship money available. That's when there are the most seats available. If you push your testing later into the spring, you're competing for scraps. I also want you to stop treating this like a lottery. Law school admissions does not apply and hope for the best. It's all about your positioning. You plan backward from the 75th percentile LSAT at your target schools. Not the median, but the 75th percentile. Because in this new lending environment, with the elimination of the Grad Plus loans, your leverage based on your LSAT score matters more than ever. Let's run simple math. If you're paying $70,000 a year over the course of 3 years, plus you got to factor in living expenses, you're easily at $250,000 to $300,000. Now, imagine if you could score 6 points higher on the LSAT to unlock an additional $35,000 per year in scholarship aid. That's over $100,000 saved. That means you're taking on less debt, you're going to have lower monthly debt payments, and you'll have more freedom in the career that you want to choose. And that difference comes down to how you prepare for the LSAT. And LSAT Prep Now looks different than it did 5 years ago. Logic games are off the test, logical reasoning and reading comp are now the focus. And those who thrive under the new LSAT aren't rushing, they are methodical. They ID the conclusion, they spot the assumption, they predict the answer before looking at the choices. In reading comp, they map the structure instead of memorizing details. Structure beats memorization every single time. So zoom out. If you're applying this fall to start law school in fall 2027, you're entering a post-grad plus loan environment. It's a higher volume applicant pool. Law schools make decisions more slowly and they are more sensitive to medians. And I know that might sound intimidating, but here is the opportunity. When the environment gets tougher, controllable variables become more valuable. Of course, you are just one applicant out of tens of thousands. You cannot control applicant volume. You can't control the federal government's lending policy. You can't control how many other people score a 170, but you can control your own LSAT score. And in this cycle, average becomes expensive. If you can score above average, that is going to be quite profitable for you in getting scholarship money because the LSAT is not just an admissions test anymore. For you, it's a financial lever, so you want to use it that way. And if you'd like my help getting the highest possible LSAT score, to score above the medians of the schools to which you're targeting, to get more scholarship money, to take on less debt, to have better employment outcomes, I'm happy to help you out. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free LSAT lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer for everyone watching this out there. I'm happy to meet with you personally, help talk you through your plan of attack to help you reach your goal LSAT score on your time frame. And for those who are just joining, I offer these free lessons, these free live streams every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. So please do share this to your socials, to your Facebook groups, Discord, subreddits, group chats. I do appreciate your spreading the word. I see a ton of questions here in the chat. I will get to as many of those as I can. Keep them coming. I see one here from Maya asking, do you think the LSAT is harder because they got rid of logic games? In a way, I think the LSAT's actually easier because you now have less material to study. A couple of years ago, you had to study 3 different types of LSAT questions: logic games, logical reasoning, reading comprehension. After the August 2024 LSAT, LSAC removed the logic games section and replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning section. So you can now narrow your focus to just logical reasoning and reading comp. You narrow your focus. Any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning are going to be doubled across the 2 sections. Of course, regardless of whether you like the change or not, we are where we are, so don't complain about the new reality, just prepare for it. Hey, Mr. Fury, I see my old high school teacher here in the chat. I appreciate the kind words. It's good to hear from you. Thanks for the support. I see Devancha asking, is it possible for a non-native speaker to score around a 175 plus on the LSAT? Absolutely. And no, you don't need to spend years improving your vocabulary. Of course, the LSAT is hard enough for native English speakers. I can't imagine how difficult it is for a non-native English speaker. But regardless, you are where you are. Read difficult, dense text, improve your understanding of English vocabulary, maybe give yourself a bit more time. to improve your familiarity with the types of language the LSAT is using. You have dozens of real, actual, official LSAT practice test questions available on LSAC's Law Hub platform. You get 4 practice tests for free, and then you get another 55 or so with your Law Hub Advantage subscription. So start early, work through them little by little. If the normal applicant should take 5 to 6 months, the typical applicant should take 5 to 6 months, someone with less familiarity with English might want to take double that duration. And so if a typical recommendation for me would be give yourself 5 to 6 months to achieve your fullest potential. If you feel like it's going to be a harder road for yourself, give yourself a year. The LSAT is the #1 most important factor in the law school admissions process. It weighs more heavily than all of your undergrad combined. It's kind of crazy how a single 2.5-hour exam weighs more heavily than all of undergrad, but that's just the way it is. So give the LSAT the due consideration that it deserves. I think it's certainly worth putting in 10 hours a week for 3 to 6 months, given that you're devoting much more time than that for a single semester in college, right? If the LSAT's more important, give it more weight. When you look at the law school admissions index for any given ABA approved law school, which is the index is the formula where law schools calculate your LSAT score and they weigh it relative to your GPA. Virtually every single law school weighs your LSAT score more heavily. You can see each index itself directly on the LSAC website. You'll see, for example, that Harvard, Yale, Columbia, NYU, Cornell, Stanford, they all weigh the LSAT more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. And so people will ask me, should I redo a class from college? Should I take more classes towards my BA? And I'm like, that's going to have a pretty negligible or marginal impact on improving your undergraduate GPA. I mean, one 3-credit class is only maybe 3% or 4% of your entire undergraduate GPA. In contrast, your LSAT score weighs more heavily than all of undergrad put together. So for that reason, study for the LSAT seriously. Take it seriously. And if you need to retake to reach your fullest potential, retake. Law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest LSAT score on your record. So if you think there is any chance you could do better by retaking the LSAT, it's worth retaking. If you do better, great. And if you don't, no big deal. So in other words, let's say, for example, your practice test average going into the LSAT was a 170. You took it and you actually scored a 170 on the LSAT. You might think I got what I deserved. But you could retake it, get a few points higher through luck alone. If you get a few points higher, great. If you're now applying with a 173, that's of course going to do a lot more for you than a 170 would have. And if you get a 170 again, doesn't matter. If you get a few points lower, again, doesn't matter because the 170 from before still counts. And LSAC has made it easier than ever before to retake the LSAT. They offer the LSAT 8 times a year. Coming up in 2026, we've got the LSAT in April, June, August, September, October, and November. And they've removed some of the previous LSAT retake limits. You can now take the LSAT 5 times in 5 years, and you could take it 7 times over the course of your life. You can also apply for exceptions to the retake limits if you do in fact hit them, which most people don't, but just for peace of mind. I see Dylan's asking, would volunteering in medicine or healthcare still be worth it to put on a law school application? So you don't need your volunteer work or your internships or your work experience to relate directly to the practice of law. You can study anything and go to law school. You can work in any field and go to law school. In fact, sometimes it's better to have work experience in a non-law school related field or non-law related field because it's more unique. Law schools are no stranger to the paralegal applicant, right? They get tons of paralegals who are applying to law school. But medicine, healthcare, it's more unique, stands out more. They might like to see that even better. Regardless, though, what matters more than your work experience or where you volunteered is the numbers. Law school admissions is primarily numbers driven. It's your LSAT score, then your GPA, then everything else. So I would rather you get a few points higher on your LSAT and not have the work experience than have a few points lower with the work experience. In other words, LSAT first and foremost, GPA number 2, everything else a distant third. If you already have it, of course, use it and celebrate it. And feel free to keep the questions coming. I'll get to as many of them as I can. Now we're in the middle of our 5-day LSAT course, the goal being to raise your LSAT score by 5 points in 5 days. Today is day 4. The 3 previous days are on the YouTube channel through the link in my bio. For today, day 4, we're talking about how to build real test day stamina, even if you burn out fast. Now, today might be the most overlooked and the most important skill in this entire challenge because we're not talking about question types or conditional logic or strategy. We're talking about endurance because the LSAT is not just a reasoning test. It is an endurance test disguised as a reasoning test. Right now, the LSAT is 2 scored logical reasoning sections and 1 scored reading comp section plus 1 scored experimental section. That means on test day, you're doing 3 scored sections in a row plus 1 extra under strict timing. That is roughly 2 hours of sustained high stakes cognitive effort. And here is what most students do. They'll practice 1 individual section at a time. They feel sharp, they feel accurate, they feel confident, but then they take a full-length test. And halfway through section 3, their brain shuts down. Their accuracy drops, their reading speed slows, they end up rereading sentences and second-guessing easy answers. And they think to themselves, why did I choke? But you didn't choke, you just ran out of gas because your endurance was not there. Now, there are 2 different kinds of fatigue or burnout on the LSAT. The first is cognitive fatigue. This is when your brain literally slows down and your working memory weakens. You'll misread small words like unless or most, and you'll stop seeing the structure clearly. The second type of fatigue is emotional fatigue, and this is anxiety-based, where you feel behind, you panic about time, and you start rushing because you're scared. Now, most students will experience both at some point during their prep, but they don't distinguish between the 2. However, top scorers understand the difference. And the solution depends on which one you're dealing with. If it's cognitive fatigue, you need better endurance training. If it's emotional fatigue, you need better pacing and pressure exposure. Now, doing 1 section at a time alone is not enough. It'll train your accuracy, but it will not train your stability. The LSAT does not reward your best 35-minute performance. It rewards your average performance across multiple sections while you're tired. That's why students will say, I score a 170 across individual sections, but a 162 on full tests. And that gap is endurance. So today, we're going to train this deliberately. I want you to complete 2 timed sections back to back without any break. I want you to make it realistic. Same desk as your official test will be on, same scratch paper setup, same strict timing. And when you finish the first section, immediately start the second. Now here's the key. You are not just measuring your score. You're measuring your decline, your reduction in accuracy due to fatigue. After each section, I want you to rate your focus, your mental clarity, your emotional steadiness, and your pacing control, each on a scale of 1 to 10. Then answer this. At what exact question did I start to feel different? Was it a harder argument, mental fatigue, time pressure, or frustration? That moment is your crash point. Most students will ignore this, but high performers train it. Now, you don't fix stamina by training harder. You fix it in the same way an athlete builds endurance, step by step, little by little. So here is a simple structure. In week 1, you do 2 sections back to back, twice over the course of the week. Then in week 2, you do 2 sections plus a 15-minute review immediately after without any long break. In week 3, you do 3 sections back to back, once over the course of the week. And then in week 4, You do one full test under realistic conditions. That is it. You are extending your cognitive ceiling gradually, not forcing it or running the risk of burnout, and not by taking full random tests every other day. You are deliberately inducing overload as a result of your structured study plan. Now, building stamina is not only about the volume of your practice, it's also about your inputs. Sleep matters. So, for example, if you're sleeping 6 hours and studying the LSAT late at night, your endurance ceiling will be artificially low. If you're intaking too much caffeine, you're going to give yourself emotional fatigue. If you don't have enough caffeine, you'll have cognitive fatigue. Test day is not the day to experiment with your caffeine. Now let's talk about time of day. If you always study at 10 p.m., but your LSAT's at 9 a.m., you're training in the wrong brain state. So take your tests at the same time you'll take the actual. Now on test day, you're going to get a short break in the middle between sections 2 and 3 of only 10 minutes. So use that strategically. Stand up, move around, slow down your breathing, reset your posture, because stamina is partially physical in nature. Your body determines your mental focus. Now, endurance will affect your score more than you think. Let's say your true ability is around a 167. If your endurance is weak, your third section might drop a couple points. And that could be the difference between a 167 and a 170, or a 170 and a 173, or getting scholarship money versus paying full price for law school. Not because you didn't understand the test, but because you couldn't sustain your performance. The good news is that is fixable. Now, most students chase peak performance. They'll celebrate the 172 practice test they hit. But schools don't care about your peak potential. They care about your actual score on test day. So you ultimately want stability. A student who consistently scores between a 168 and a 170 is a lot stronger than someone who bounces around between a 160 and a 173. You want to reduce the variance by training your endurance. And so that is what we are building today. So your homework is to first complete 2 timed sections back to back with no break between them. You're tracking how your score drops over the course of sections 1 and 2. Then if you do 4 sections in one sitting, between sections 1, 2, 3, and 4, you want to ID where you dropped and write down one adjustment for next time around. That might be better pacing early, more sleep the night before, being more aware of the section order, and managing your confidence. Regardless, the key is awareness. You cannot improve what you don't measure. And of course, the LSAT's not won in the first 10 questions, it's won in the last 10 questions of your final section when everybody else is fading. So today, we're training endurance. And if you'd like my help crafting a structured study plan to help you get from your current LSAT score to your goal LSAT score by your target test date, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this, now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me personally is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. That is an open offer for everyone watching this now and later. Now I see Unknown is asking, I'm looking to take the LSAT this June and apply this fall. Is that possible or is it too rushed? So if you want to take the LSAT in June of 2026, to apply in fall of 2026, to start law school in fall of 2027, the good news is that is not too late. That's actually early. I love that time frame because you take it in June, you've got the August LSAT as a backup test date, applications open in September, and you can apply right when applications open, when there is more scholarship money available, when it's easier to get in. I think it's actually a pretty ideal time frame. I love it. Are you brand new to the LSAT or have you been studying for a while? I mean, you've got roughly 3.5, 4 months till the June LSAT. That is a pretty good amount of time. And so I think it's doable that you could achieve a pretty good score. So you've been studying for a month so far. Okay, so that's giving you roughly 4.5 months in total, 5 months. That's a fairly good time frame to achieve a pretty decent score. Yeah, so if you want to reach out and talk through options, I'm happy to help you out. Feel free to book the free LSAT lesson with me. I'm happy to meet with you personally, help you talk you through your plan of attack. I see a question here about lawsuits. That's not really my personal area of expertise. I would recommend maybe talking to an attorney to get some more guidance on whatever your situation is. I wish I could help, but maybe we have some lawyers in the room here who could help you out with that. Let's see other questions coming in here. Goose Goat's asking, why did law school get more expensive? Okay, so the federal government is eliminating the federal Grad Plus loans. For those who are not aware, graduate school funding has often been determined by how much you can borrow from the federal government. But with the elimination of the Grad Plus loans, you're capped on how much you can borrow. There's a maximum of $50,000 per year that you can borrow for graduate school, but the typical or average cost of attendance is roughly $84,000 per year. So you've got a $34,000 shortfall. And the question is, how do you make that up? That's the new reality a lot of students are facing when entering law school this fall or next fall. And some law schools are reacting to the elimination of the Grad Plus loans by offering more scholarship money. Of course, we can't expect that they're going to necessarily reduce their tuition, at least not the sticker price. And so the best way for you to personally make up that shortfall is by getting you more scholarship money. And you get more scholarship money by getting a higher LSAT score. If you can apply to law school with an LSAT score and a GPA above the medians of the schools that you're targeting, law schools will reward you by giving you more scholarship money because you help them raise their standing in the U.S. News Law School rankings. Law schools are heavily incentivized to raise their standing in the rankings because it helps them attract more applicants, and it also helps them attract more donations from their alums. And so the U.S. News rankings consider 4 big factors related to the quality of the students. It's the LSAT score median, it's the GPA median, it's the employment with a JD required degree 9 months after graduation, and it's the bar passage rate. And so law schools want to take students who have high LSAT scores, have high GPAs, are likely to pass the bar, and are likely to be employed 9 months after graduation with a JD required degree. Law schools can see directly what was your LSAT score, what was your GPA. And of course, your undergraduate GPA is probably pretty fixed by the time that you're applying to law school because most applicants are already done with undergrad, if not almost finishing. But your LSAT score is a single metric that you earn over the course of 2.5 hours in a single day, and that will weigh more heavily than your entire undergraduate degree combined. And so what you want to do is retake the LSAT for the highest LSAT score possible to improve your odds of acceptance and getting scholarship money. The bar passage rates, of course, they don't know how you're going to pass the bar or whether you will pass it, but the LSAT is considered a valid and reliable admission test because it is strongly correlated with first-year law school grades and bar passage rates. So the LSAT is essentially a predictor of your bar passage likelihood. Not a guarantee, of course, but it's the most objective metric that they have. And so when you're looking at how can you indicate that you are a strong applicant, it's by having a higher LSAT score, by having a higher GPA. And that will also predict somewhat your bar passage likelihood. Now, employment with a JD required degree, of course, they don't know whether you're going to get a job post-graduation, but the stronger impression you can make on the law schools based on how you show up, how you interview, how presentable you are. If you end up interviewing with them, whether live on video or in person or through one of those Kira video modules, how you present yourself will somewhat help to what extent they'll think you're employable. If you show up well, not looking disheveled, wearing a suit or at least a business attire, that will help to some extent. If you have not gotten an interview offer, a lot of schools don't interview, you can still request an informational interview, and that will to some extent indicate your employability or how you interview at least. So go with what you can do. Now, Keith is asking why they capped the Grad Plus loans. This is part of the federal government's war on institutions of higher education and universities in general. I'm not going to get overly involved in the politics here, But just look up the Trump administration and its battles with Harvard and Columbia and such, and you'll get a sense of what might be going on there. I'm not going to speculate as to motives, but I'll just say that basically the federal government wants to reduce the tuition that schools are charging. And so schools that are tuition dependent will need to do something about this because they can't rely on their endowments, for example. They've got to adjust their tuition and what they charge to make up for that. The chat's getting a little bit spicy here. I'll try to take the more serious questions here. All right. Woe is asking, what books do you recommend studying with if you're brand new? Well, I actually don't recommend studying for the LSAT out of books because the LSAT is not administered on paper anymore. The LSAT is online using the Prometric software. And so I recommend studying like you're going to be taking it on game day. The best place to study with practice tests is LSAC's Law Hub platform. You get 4 practice tests for free on Law Hub. You get the others with your Law Hub Advantage subscription. That is the exact software that test day is going to be like, the same functionality, the same look and feel with the underlining tool, the highlighting tool, the line spacing. LSAC is actually adjusting the user interface for anyone taking the LSAT. I believe later this year it's coming. You'll be able to practice with it starting next month in March. And part of the reason for the user interface change is all the LSAT cheating that's been going on. They wanted to make a platform that's more robust, less vulnerable to hacking. And so if you're studying for the LSAT out of books, you're not going to be familiar with the software. And students typically, their scores drop by typically 5 to 8 points from the practice to the actual. So you've got to mitigate the risk of that score drop by familiarizing yourself with the software. Now, a lot of the prep books out there are outdated. The LSAT has undergone a lot of changes in recent years. Of course, there was the removal of the logic games section. So some books that are referencing logic games and teaching you logic games are, of course, outdated. You don't want to be using those. There was the recent reading comprehension change in July, where LSAC, without warning, stopped giving some test takers the dual or comparative passages. And so the prep books wouldn't cover that. And they won't cover the Law Hub user interface changes either. And so for that reason, I say don't use the books because they're outdated. And even worse, a lot of them contain mistakes. A lot of them are on Amazon, have fake reviews, and are AI generated. And AI, unfortunately, is unaware that logic games is no longer on the test because the training data used within the AI is largely referencing logic games because logic games were on the test for over 20 years. So prep like you're going to take it. Use Law Hub. Of course, at the LSAT Unplugged course, we are entirely up to date for the new LSAT format. No logic games, a whole lot more on logical reasoning. The LSAT format changes, including the return to in-person starting this August, the elimination of the remote testing option. If you want to talk through what a personal coaching program could look like for you, using our program, we offer private one-on-one coaching, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, custom study plans. You could book the free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally to talk through all of this. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. To Kyra's question here, the in-person testing requirement goes into effect starting August of this year in roughly 6 months, with rare exceptions only for those who have medical accommodations or can demonstrate extreme hardship. For everybody else, it will be required in person starting in August. So your last opportunity to take the LSAT remotely, in most cases, is going to be taking the LSAT in April or June. And so if you think you'll do better taking it remotely from home, I'd recommend getting ready to take the LSAT by that time. I see Excellent is asking, if some schools don't require the LSAT, does this cut the chances for scholarship opportunities? Only if you take them up on their offer to avoid the LSAT. There are many law schools that will technically not require the LSAT, but in reality, almost everybody's getting in with an LSAT score officially on record. And fewer than 5% of applicants are getting in without an LSAT score. Virtually everybody's taken the LSAT, and that's the route for them. So, for example, last year, 41,000 students got into law school with an LSAT score, and less than 200 got in with the JD Next. So 41,000 versus less than 200. That tells you something real, right? For all the headlines about the JD Next and the GRE, almost nobody's actually getting in with those alternatives. The LSAT is still the main game in town, and while you might be able to get in without the LSAT, you might not get scholarship money without the LSAT. I think if you apply without the LSAT score, you're doing yourself a serious disservice, because the LSAT is your chance to help law schools raise their standing in the US News rankings. If you don't have an LSAT score, how are you helping them? Law schools report your LSAT score to the American Bar Association. In turn, US News pulls that data about your LSAT score for inclusion in the rankings. If you don't have an LSAT score, there is no way you're helping that school raise their standing in the rankings on the basis of the LSAT, because there is no LSAT score for them to report. And then the question is, well, how strong an applicant are you really? Because your undergraduate GPA is not really an objective metric, because who's to say there wasn't grade inflation? Who's to say you weren't just getting easy A's? At least the LSAT is an objective, standardized metric, regardless of who your professor was or what you majored in. It's a more apples to apples comparison, a way for them to compare students from different backgrounds with different majors at different kinds of institutions. The LSAT's the same whether you're 20 or whether you're 40, whether you're in the US or whether you're in Canada, whether you're an international student. It is a common objective metric they can look at to compare people. It's not perfect, of course, but it's better than GPA alone. And so if you want to maximize your admissions, maximize your scholarship money, show law schools you are likely to pass the bar exam and not flunk out after 1L, the LSAT is the best way for you to show them your capabilities. And you could knock it out in just a couple of months. So I think avoiding would be a missed opportunity. You don't want to miss out on that chance to improve your odds of admission and get yourself the scholarships. The LSAT score is the easiest money you'll ever make in getting into better law schools, getting yourself more scholarship money, and it will set the entire trajectory of the rest of your legal career. Now, I see a question from FISA asking, I have a 3-2 engineering undergrad and 5 months to study for the LSAT. Can you help me set a good goal and schedule to prioritize financial aid? Okay, so you've got 5 months to study for the LSAT. I'm guessing you're taking it in maybe June or August. So that's a good amount of time. A 3.2 GPA in undergrad is a bit below average, unfortunately. Of course, it's understandable. I mean, you took engineering, not an area of study subject to a lot of grade inflation. So it's a lot harder to get a high GPA in engineering than it is in English. So not faulting you for that. But the sad truth is, when it comes to law school admissions, that your GPA is your GPA. Doesn't matter what you studied. It's not fair, but that's how it is. So you're going to want to balance out that relatively lower GPA with a higher LSAT score to compensate. Now, there is a question I want to ask, which is, FISA, did you study undergrad in North America or outside North America? Because that's a factor as well. If you got your GPA outside North America, law schools don't know how to interpret your undergraduate GPA. And so for that reason, they focus more on the LSAT. If you did your undergrad within the USSU, you took it in Chicago, then GPA still counts, which is for anyone out there watching this. So you want to balance the GPA with a higher LSAT score. You've got 5 months to raise your score. And so my advice to you is really the same as it would be for anybody else, except in your case, your LSAT score is more important because of the relatively lower GPA. So I divide LSAT preparation into 5 phases. Laser approach: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. That is the acronym for the LASER approach. L is for learning, building a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. A is for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. S is for sections, doing individual time sections to work on your pacing and your time management. E is for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed exams to build up your stamina. And then R is for review, going in depth, looking into what you're getting wrong and why, so that you can avoid making the same mistake again. At LSAT Unplugged, we use the Socratic review method. It's the cornerstone of our courses and our coaching programs. The idea being, we want to ask you a series of guiding questions to help you get to the root cause of what you're getting wrong and why, so that you can avoid making the same mistakes again. So for example, was your mistake in the stimulus in the passage, or was it in the question, or was it in the answer choices? If it was in the choices, was it a tempting wrong answer or an unappealing right answer? Because if we can get to the root cause, we nip it in the bud, and you don't make the same mistake again. And so to raise your LSAT score to the greatest possible extent over the next 5 months or so, I would recommend devoting 2 months to building your foundation and drilling questions by type. So maybe 1 month foundation, 1 month drilling, 1 month on individual sections to work on your pacing, 2 months on full-length exams, and review throughout the entire process. So for the LASER approach, a month for the L for learning, a month for the A for accuracy, a month of S for sections, and 2 months for exams and endurance to build up your stamina and incorporating review throughout the process. That would be the ideal way we would structure a study plan for you if you were in our coaching program. If you want to talk through what that could look like for you, you could book the free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally. The link to book that with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. And by the way, for those just joining, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everyone watching this, and I offer these lives every single weekday, same time, same place. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start for the one-on-one. For the lives, please share it to your social, share it on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook groups, Slack. I do appreciate your support. I do these lives every single weekday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. Please spread the word. I do appreciate your support. Happy to help you out. I see more questions coming in here. I'll get to as many of them as I can. Keep them coming. I see Ella's asking, why on law school data is there so much variance for folks with the same stats who have way different T14 outcomes? Well, I mean, stats are predictive and probabilistic, but they're not destiny, they're not guarantees, right? So your resume does play a role, your applications do play a role, your essay plays a role, how you interview plays a role, connections might matter as well. And there's an element of randomness involved. Also, when you apply in the cycle matters, right? So applying in September might have different outcomes than if you applied in February or if you applied in April. In other words, it's a bit easier to get in earlier in the process, earlier in the cycle, than to get in later. So maybe you could apply with slightly lower numbers and get better outcomes earlier in the cycle versus later. Now, of course, better to apply later with a higher score than earlier with a lower score, though. So you got to balance these considerations out. But if you think you could do better with a few points more by applying a little bit later, might be worth the wait. Of course, you're rolling the dice there a little bit, but that could explain part of the differential there. I see Michelle's asking about online law school options. Is there a reference for those? The American Bar Association website has a list of programs that offer either hybrid or fully online law school programs. The list is growing year by year, more and more over time. I think there are at least a dozen schools offering some form of online JD right now. Some options I'm aware of off the top of my head are St. Mary's Law School in Texas, 100% online. There's Syracuse Law School. There's Mitchell Hamlin Law School as well, as a popular hybrid program, but there are about a dozen in total. Keep in mind that there are very few seats available for these online law school programs, way more demand than there is supply. So apply early, take it seriously. The stats that are required to get into law school in person for a given school are lower than it would be to get into the online version of that same law school. In other words, it's a bit harder to get into the online version than to get into the in-person version of the exact same law school. So always keep that in mind when you're applying. Talk to admissions directly. They'll tell you straight up what kind of numbers are required and give you some personal guidance on what kind of LSAT score you're going to need for a given law school. And many of these programs are accredited. They have a provisional accreditation from the American Bar Association. In other words, they're not guaranteed to be able to keep offering this long term. It's provisional based on the outcomes of how their students do. But you can get an ABA approved or accredited JD from one of these programs. I see Mercy's asking, I've taken the LSAT twice, did bad both times. Is it worth taking the LSAT a third time? It very well could be. I guess the question is, Mercy, how did you study your initial 2 times? Was it just self-studying with free videos? Did you take a course? Did you get coaching? Were you using LSAT for Dummies or one of those AI slop textbooks on Amazon with fake reviews? There may be some points left on the table if you haven't gotten truly personalized support and haven't had a structured study plan. Because the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. But once we add some proper support into the mix, there's usually a pretty quick score boost to be had, meaning there's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit. So it may be that it's worthwhile for you to retake. The question is, do you clearly see a path forward to improve your LSAT score? Meaning, is there some support or a study method that you did not take advantage of that you could this time around that you think would be likely to get you a boost? What we usually find is that when you've been studying on your own, there is low-hanging fruit because there's those unknown unknowns. So for example, adopting a review process like the Socratic review method, a root cause analysis, helping you dig into the cause of what you're getting wrong and why, so that you can avoid making the same mistake the next time around. If you see that untapped potential, it's worth retaking. I'd also want to get a more concrete sense, Mercy, of what your current score is, what your goal score is, when you want to retake it, and how much time you can put in per day and per week. I typically like to see students putting in at least 5 to 10 hours per week to make steady forward progress. If you can only put in 1 or 2 hours a week, that's probably not going to be enough time. You got to build the skills, and that takes time to get the rhythms down to help them sink in. But if you could do even 5 to 10 hours a week, you might be able to improve 10, 15 points by April. And if you're going for June instead, you could improve far more than that. And if you want to apply to law school this fall in September, you could take it any one of April, June, or August and apply as soon as applications open. And there's plenty of time for you to improve significantly. And so, Mercy, if you haven't already, book the free LSAT tutoring with me and we could talk through this more. I see a question here from Imo Levine asking, is it realistic to go from a 132 diagnostic to the 99th percentile by August? So that's a 132 to a 175, 175 being top 1% over the next 5 to 6 months. It's certainly possible. I'm not going to say it's easy to improve 43 points over any period of time, but I believe anyone can do it. Your improvement's ultimately a function of the amount that you study and the way in which you study. And I personally don't put a lot of stock in cold diagnostics. It's fine to take them as a simple benchmark of where you stand currently from which to measure your later future progress. But the cold diagnostic simply tells you what you already know, which is that you haven't yet learned the language of the LSAT, but of course you can. The LSAT's kind of like a foreign language when you're initially getting into it. There's roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions. You've got reading comprehension as well. Then there's pacing and time management, doing individual sections, and full-length exams to build up your endurance. And so there is a lot of work for you to do. You can get it done, though. You've got 5-6 months, plenty of time to improve significantly. And you want to have a structured study plan, of course. And so book the free LSAT tutoring with me. Links in my bio, and we could talk through it more. I see a question here from Xi Jinping's asking, how many weeks should one study at 1 hour a day for their first attempt? There's not really a single hard and fast number I would recommend for you there. I mean, the question is, how much do you want to improve? You get out of it what you put into it. And if you're willing to put in 1 hour a day, I guarantee you there is somebody else out there who's your competition, who's willing to put in 2 hours a day, right? I mean, 2 hours a day is only 10, 15 hours a week. It's really not that much time considering the importance of the LSAT. And why would you go into this thinking, hey, it's just my first attempt? Why wouldn't you give it your all and try to be one and done? I'm not saying that you have to be one and done. You can, of course, retake, and that's totally fine. But why wouldn't you give it your all and at least try to hit your goal? In other words, why do less than you think is necessary to achieve your fullest potential? We also got to get more context, right? What's your current score? If you've taken a diagnostic, that's useful context. What kind of score do you want to achieve? And when are you planning on taking it? If you want a 180, 1 hour a day doesn't sound like that much to achieve a perfect score. And even a 175 top 1%, an hour a day also really isn't that much. The people who get top scores typically put in more time than those who get lower scores. And forgive me if that sounds obvious, I know it is. But my point here is that to achieve a top 1% score, you got to study differently than the other 99%. And if you're thinking, hey, just the first attempt, I'm going to retake, I'm a busy guy or gal, that's totally fine. But know that you may end up needing to retake. I typically recommend at minimum 5-10 hours a week over a relatively longer period of time, over the course of, say, 5 to 6 months, ramping it up as you get closer. If your study time frame is more compressed, we could put together for you a more intensive boot camp style program where we compress our standard 4 to 6 month curriculum into only a couple months. If you want to talk that through, reach out to me. Happy to help. I'll get to some other questions here before wrapping up here. I see James is asking, I got a 157 on a cold diagnostic. Is that solid? Yeah, I mean, it's above average. The average is roughly a 152, 153, so you're above average there. But of course, whether it's solid depends on your goals. If you want a 175, 180, you got some work to do. You can do it, but know what you're up against. If you want a 165 and that's all you need, then of course, you're pretty close. But we always got to look at what's your goal score and what's your time frame. Then we'll have a sense of what kind of work you got to put in between now and then. James is saying, I think the loan changes under the Big Beautiful Bill is a positive thing for law students. I mean, it's good and bad, right? The bad is obvious, right? Because you're capped in how much you can borrow. Might have to resort to private loans with higher interest rates, digging into savings, friends and family, all that, not ideal. I think the consumer protection benefit here on a more macro scale is that it will exert some downward pressure on how much law schools charge, because law schools and really universities in general have been able to raise tuition at faster than the rate of inflation for decades because they know that the loans are going to cover them, right? Because basically if they raise the price, demand is relatively inelastic because students will just go to the federal government to borrow loans to make up for it, right? And so schools can charge more and more, students borrow more and more, schools get to keep the money no matter what, but students are liable for the debt. So I think in that way, it is a positive thing in that schools will eventually have to cap or ideally lower tuition if students become resistant to taking out the loans because they can't afford it. But in the meantime, until the market adjusts, we're in a bit of a tight spot here where ultimately your best course of action in the short term is to be able to negotiate scholarships hard to get a discount on tuition. And the way you put yourself in the optimal negotiation position where you have leverage is by applying to law schools where your numbers are relatively strong compared to their medians. If you have a strong LSAT and a strong GPA above the 75th percentile of the schools to which you're targeting, then as a result, you will be able to negotiate significant scholarships on tuition, possibly get a full ride. That will be the downward pressure that you personally are exerting through being in a powerful negotiating position, and you may be able to get a full ride. And if you want my help getting that kind of LSAT score that makes law schools want you to go there and them willing to give you scholarship money by getting a higher LSAT score, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free call with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. Links below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever else. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.